Hello and welcome to Two Bots Talking, the podcast where we break down the biggest topics in history, science, and culture. I'm your host, Alex.
And I'm your co-host, Mia. It's great to be here. Alex, today we're tackling a massive subject, one that really changed the course of the 20th century.
That's right, Mia. We're talking about D-Day, specifically the Normandy landings on June 6, 1944. It's a day that's almost mythical in its scale and importance.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, they know the name D-Day. They've maybe seen movies like Saving Private Ryan, but the sheer complexity of what happened is hard to grasp. So where do we even begin?
Let's start with the why. By 1944, Europe was largely under the control of Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union was fighting a brutal war on the Eastern Front, and the Allies, primarily the United States, Britain, and Canada, knew they had to open up a second front in the West to relieve pressure on the Soviets and ultimately liberate France.
Right, to basically squeeze Germany from both sides.
Exactly. But invading mainland Europe from the sea is, well, it's a logistical nightmare. Germany had spent years building the Atlantic Wall, a massive system of coastal defenses, bunkers, and obstacles stretching for thousands of miles.
So they couldn't just pick any spot and go for it. There must have been an incredible amount of planning involved.
Incredible is an understatement. The code name for the whole operation was Operation Overlord, and a huge part of its success depended not just on strength, but on deception.
Oh, I think I've heard about this. The Ghost Army, right?
That's the one. It was called Operation Fortitude. The Allies created a completely fake army group, the first U.S. Army group, supposedly based in southeast England. They had inflatable tanks, wooden airplanes, and fake radio traffic to convince the Germans that the main invasion was coming at the Pas de Calais.
Inflatable tanks. That's wild. And why the Pas de Calais?
Because it's the narrowest point of the English Channel. It was the most logical place to invade, so the Germans had their strongest defenses and best troops concentrated there. The goal was to make them look one way, while the real invasion force prepared to strike somewhere else entirely, Normandy.
That makes so much sense. Pin their best troops down far away from the real target.
And it worked brilliantly. Even after the landings began in Normandy, Hitler was convinced it was just a diversion and refused to release the panzer divisions from Calais for several critical hours. Those hours were absolutely vital.
And it wasn't just the enemy they had to worry about, right? I heard the weather almost canceled the whole thing.
You're absolutely right to bring that up. In early June 1944, the English Channel was hit by one of the worst storms in decades. The invasion was initially set for June 5th, but the sea was so violent with such high winds that launching the fleet would have been suicidal. Eisenhower had to make an agonizing decision: delay and risk the secret getting out, or go and risk total disaster.
So it all came down to a weather forecast?
Incredibly, yes. His chief meteorologist, a British group captain named James Stagg, identified a tiny, precarious window of calmer weather opening up on June 6th. The German forecasters, meanwhile, predicted the storm would continue, so they were completely relaxed. In fact, the German commander in charge of coastal defenses, the famous Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, felt so confident the invasion wasn't coming that he had gone home to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday.
And the fact that the deception worked so well is a testament to the Allied planners. We always hear about Eisenhower, but who were some of the other key figures making these huge decisions?
That's a great point. While Eisenhower was the supreme commander, he had a team of brilliant commanders under him. On the ground, the invasion was led by British General Bernard Montgomery, a meticulous and sometimes controversial figure, but undeniably effective. The American ground forces were commanded by General Omar Bradley, known as the GI's general for his calm and caring demeanor.
And what about from the German side? Who was the opposing commander and what were they thinking?
Absolutely. Technology and innovation were critical. For instance, the basic challenge of getting troops from a ship onto a hostile beach under fire is immense. The solution was a revolutionary craft called the Higgins boat. It was a simple, flat-bottomed landing craft with a wide ramp at the front that could be lowered. This meant men could run straight onto the beach rather than climbing over the sides and exposing themselves. Eisenhower himself said that without the Higgins boat, the war might have been lost.
Wow. So let's talk about the day itself, June 6th. What did it look like? What was the scale of this thing?
The scale is mind-boggling. It remains the largest seaborne invasion in history. Nearly 7,000 vessels, warships, landing crafts, support ships formed an armada that stretched for miles. In the air, over 11,000 aircraft. On the ground, more than 150,000 troops would land on the first day.
150,000 in one day. That's a whole city of people moving across the water. Beyond the sheer number of ships and men, what about the technology? Were there any game-changing innovations that made the landings possible?
It is. And the invasion wasn't just at one spot. The Allies targeted a 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coast, which was divided into 5 sectors, or beaches. From west to east, they were Utah, Omaha, Gold, Sword, and Juneau.
Okay, so Utah and Omaha were the American beaches, right? And the others were British and Canadian?
Correct. Gold and Sword were British, and Juneau was Canadian. But before any of those soldiers hit the sand, another crucial part of the operation began in the dead of night: the paratroopers.
Right, dropping in behind enemy lines. What was their mission?
Their job was to sow chaos and secure key objectives, like bridges and crossroads, to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches once the main invasion started. Thousands of American and British paratroopers were dropped into the French countryside. It was incredibly dangerous work.
Speaking of disrupting the German response, did the paratroopers get any help from the French resistance on the ground?
An immense amount. The French resistance was absolutely vital. For months leading up to the invasion, they provided a constant stream of intelligence on German troop movements and fortifications. Then, on the night of June 5th, the BBC broadcasted coded messages, lines of poems, which were the signal for a massive, coordinated campaign of sabotage.
So they were essentially an invisible army, weakening the enemy from within before the first soldier even landed.
Precisely. Resistance fighters blew up railway lines, cut telephone wires, and ambushed German patrols, creating chaos and significantly delaying the arrival of German reinforcements to Normandy. Their contribution was immeasurable and came at a huge personal risk.
I can't even imagine jumping out of a plane into total darkness, not knowing what's below.
Many were scattered far from their drop zones, but they formed small groups and did what they could. Their bravery was essential in disrupting the German response. Then, at dawn, the naval bombardment began, and the landing craft started heading for the beaches.
And the experiences at those 5 beaches were very different, weren't they? I know Omaha is famous for being particularly brutal.
Tragically so. At Utah Beach, things went relatively smoothly. The currents had actually pushed the landing craft to a less defended section of the beach, and casualties were the lightest of the day. But Omaha was a nightmare.
What went wrong there?
Almost everything. The pre-landing naval and aerial bombardments had completely missed their targets, leaving the German defenses on the high bluffs overlooking the beach virtually untouched. The amphibious tanks that were supposed to provide cover sank in the rough seas.
Oh no. So the soldiers were completely exposed?
Completely. The moment the ramps on the landing craft dropped, they were met with devastating machine gun and artillery fire. The first waves of troops were cut down. For hours, the invasion was pinned down at the water's edge, and there was a real possibility that the landing at Omaha might fail. Still,
How did they turn it around?
Through sheer grit and incredible acts of individual bravery, small groups of soldiers, led by junior officers and NCOs, started to find small gaps in the German defenses. They used Bangalore torpedoes to blow holes in the barbed wire and slowly, painfully, began fighting their way up the bluffs. By the end of the day, they had secured a precarious toehold, but the cost was immense, over 2,000 American casualties on Omaha alone.
It's easy to get lost in the grand strategy, but this was all carried out by individuals. Are there any personal accounts that stand out to you? That's just staggering. What about the other beaches, Gold, Juno, and Sword?
They faced stiff resistance, but nothing on the scale of Omaha. The Canadians at Juno Beach had a particularly tough fight and pushed farther inland than any other Allied unit on D-Day. The British at Gold and Sword also met their objectives, linking up with the paratroopers who had secured key bridges. By the end of June 6th, against all odds, all 5 beachheads were established.
Okay, so the beachheads are established, but that raises a new question for me. How on earth did the Allies supply hundreds of thousands of troops on open beaches without a major port?
That's an excellent question, Mia, and it gets to the heart of the true genius of the Overlord plan. The Allies knew they couldn't capture a major port like Cherbourg right away, so they decided to bring their own ports with them. Impossible as it sounds, they did it. The project was codenamed Mulberry. 2 massive artificial harbors were constructed in secret in Britain. They were made of huge concrete caissons that could be sunk to form breakwaters and floating steel roadways that connected to the shore. These components were towed across the English Channel in the days following the invasion and assembled off Omaha and Gold beaches.
That's one of the most incredible things I've ever heard. What about fuel? An army runs on fuel, and tankers must have been huge targets.
Another ingenious solution. It was called Pluto, which stood for Pipeline Under the Ocean. In the months after D-Day, Allied engineers laid flexible pipelines on the seabed of the English Channel, pumping hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel directly to the armies in France. It was a monumental undertaking that was completely invisible to the enemy.
Artificial harbors in the middle of a war zone? That sounds impossible.
It was a result of years of planning, brilliant deception, and the unbelievable courage of the individual soldier. But D-Day itself wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the end.
Right. This was just step one. They had to get off the beaches and into France.
Exactly. The next phase was the Battle of Normandy, which lasted for almost 3 more months. It was a brutal, grinding fight through the dense hedgerows of the French countryside, the Bocage country. But the foothold gained on D-Day was the key. Without it, the liberation of Europe couldn't have happened.
And eventually, that path led to Paris and then to Germany itself.
It did. Paris was liberated in August 1944. The war in Europe would continue for nearly another year, but D-Day sealed Germany's fate. They were now fighting a massive war on 2 fronts, a situation they couldn't sustain.
When you think about the legacy of D-Day, what stands out the most to you?
For me, it's the international cooperation. You had Americans, British, Canadians, Polish, Free French forces, and many others all working together for a common goal. It was a monumental effort of Allied unity. And on a human level, it's a profound reminder of the sacrifices made by an entire generation. These were mostly ordinary young men asked to do something truly extraordinary in the face of unimaginable terror. One paratrooper from the 101st Airborne described the moment the doors of the plane opened over Normandy. He said, "The whole world was on fire. You could see the tracers coming up at you and the flak exploding everywhere. You just held on to your gear and prayed you'd make it to the ground in one piece." That visceral sense of jumping into pure chaos is something that has always stayed with me.
That's beautifully put. It's a day that really highlights both the massive strategic scale of war and the incredible importance of individual courage.
It really does. From General Eisenhower, who made the final, agonizing decision to launch the invasion despite terrible weather, down to the private soldier crawling up the sand on Omaha Beach, every single person played a part.
Well, this has been an incredible overview, Alex. You've really brought the story of D Day to life, from the clever deception with inflatable tanks to the raw courage on the beaches.
It's a story that deserves to be told and remembered. And that just about wraps it up for this episode of Two Bots Talking. Thank you for listening.
Join us next time when we dive into another fascinating topic. Until then, I'm Mia.
And I'm Alex. Have a great day, everyone. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. Much love.